Every first Monday of the month we have Norma Tobin, the president of St. Mary's District Historical Society, and we'll be talking about the struggle to get a doctor for St. Mary's, childbirth at the time when families were large, the lack of hygiene in the early days, and some of the early remedies that were used. Good morning, Norma. How are you?
Good morning, Charlie. Fine, thank you.
You had a good month?
Yes, very busy one.
Very busy one.
With the Spring Festival
So
all the other associated activities, but it's all hugely successful.
It's all over? Everything was successful. The parade was excellent.
Yes, the only problem with the parade was the number of people in the street. The parade had trouble getting through, so we'll address that problem next year,
right.
But it's a good problem to have.
And also, there was a lot of kids running around. In front of me, I had a car that they were giving things away. They just threw it. And I had kids running in front of my van, which I couldn't see where I was. I could only see ahead of me, but not under me. And there's kids right under the wheels there.
Oh, it was a problem. I think the handouts may have caused the biggest
the handouts,
problem.
See, little kids, they don't know. They're just trying to, and they're running in front of them, and like with a float, you're only seeing ahead of you. You can't see underneath you there.
That's right.
And it was a bit scary, there is. I had a guy said, listen, walk in front of me, because I can't see nothing underneath me. Anyway, but it was excellent. Lots of people. The crowd is increasing every year.
Huge crowd. It was just unbelievable. It was great to see so many families out having a good time.
Yeah, it is,
That's what it's all about.
And what do you think of the Panthers?
Great. Oh, no, very, very pleased for them.
Excellent.
It's a bit of a fairy tale.
Got the double,
Yes, it was very good and very exciting.
Hope they carry on with their success in the next season.
Oh, I hope so.
Excellent. I'll leave it to you now, Norma.
All right then, Charlie. We've been reading a lot lately about our health service being in crisis and how when you go to public hospitals you have to wait 4 or 5 hours sometimes to see a doctor. So that prompted me to go back to my history books and just do a little bit of research on just how difficult things were.
Them days,
Not that we want to go back to those days for sure, but with the availability of all the technology that's around today,
you'd expect something better.
We're very lucky to have all this, and when you think back to the early settlement in St. Mary's where there was just nothing, excuse me, you just wonder how those people coped.
That's right,
Because although farming commenced here in the early 1800s, there were no medical services for nearly 100 years. And in that time the population was building up. And people tended to resort to what we call today old wives' tales. But I think some of them must have worked because a lot of our early inhabitants lived to quite a good age.
A long time,
I think children were the main victims because today a lot of childhood illnesses, you take your child off to the doctor, they get some antibiotics, they're right in 2 or 3 days, but because in those days was no antibiotics, very few medicines, no immunisation, but poor little children just at the mercy of the elements, and when you go through any of the local graveyards, you'll see the number of very young children's graves there. It's quite sad. I know there's one particular grave in the St Mary Magdalene graveyard where there are 5 children from one family. None of them reached 12 months old.
Jeez.
And that family actually had 6 children, but they only reared 1.
Only one.
So I think, if they could get the children over those early years, quite often they went on to live quite a long life. But there was just nothing they could do. Once they got sick, that was it.
Must have been hard life, eh?
Oh, I think so. I'm sure. I just made a note of some of the remedies they used in the old days. Like if you had a sore throat, you mixed butter and sugar together and you had a teaspoonful of butter and sugar to ease your throat. If if people around you had colds, you wore a little bag around your neck on a string with a camphor block in it. And that had the, kept your nose clear and all this sort of thing. And of course, for an earache, a good old teaspoon of warm olive oil into the ear.
Yep.
That was the treatment for, excuse me, that was the popular treatment for earache. Although I can remember when my children were small, my mother-in-law told me an old wives' tale where you cooked a slice of toast and wrapped that in a cloth and put it on the ear, and that took away the earache. And
My mother used to
surprisingly, I found it worked.
put cotton, a bit of cotton, put a bit of warm oil in it and put it in the ear.
That's right, yes. Of course, then anything else you had wrong with you, you got a dose of castor oil. Famous old blue bottle of castor oil, and I think I was on the receiving end of that more than once. But because they had Zambuck, that was the antiseptic and healing cream, you know, that would supposedly heal everything from rheumatism to a snake bite. And Dr. Morse's Indian root pills, and that cleansed the system, and the old Heenzo for coughs and colds. And I like the one about Beecham's pills. Exercise has a bracing influence upon the entire system, so people obviously relied on all these remedies, and but I think in a lot of cases it must have been self-diagnosis, so that they knew which of these patent medicines to take.
Right.
But in the 1800s, there were a lot of what they called friendly societies around, and you could belong to that for about a shilling a week or something like that. And there was the Oddfellows and the Druids and the Foresters, all in this area. And they actually employed doctors to go into areas, but the societies that were here in St Mary's weren't terribly successful in attracting medical staff to St Mary's. And it wasn't until after the council was actually formed in 1890 that they put a little bit of pressure on these societies to try and attract doctors here. There was a doctor came in 1891, a Dr. Faust. He had trained in Germany, and he advertised in the local paper of the day that he was a surgeon and pharmaceutical chemist, and he was available for consultation at St Mary's. Now, we haven't got very much information about him other than that he had 2 children christened in the St Mary Magdalene Church.
Oh,
so
right.
we think, well, he was here probably for about 4 years anyway, but we don't know where he lived or where he practiced, but it's just that he put that one ad in the paper.
Only one ad?
Oh, well,
right.
that's one that we know of. I mean, we don't have, they haven't got all the old papers, but that one is on file. So he obviously left after that time, and then another chap by the name of Mr. Lawson came, and he advertised his services in dispensing prescriptions, extracting teeth, and selling patent medicines. So I think they had a go at everything, you know. Just what his qualifications were, I don't know, but he wasn't a doctor, but maybe he was a chemist. But there was one time there was quite a serious accident. A woodcutter had apparently missed the wood and hit his foot with the axe, and this Mr. Lawson put some stitches in his foot, so he must have had some expertise. But what happened to the woodcutter, I'm just not that sure.
Oh, right.
But of course there were no hospitals. The nearest doctors were Penrith, Liverpool, or in the Richmond-Windsor area. So that if you were seriously ill, they'd have to send a messenger to that doctor, and then by the time the doctor got the horse and buggy out or rode horseback, it was could be 5 or 6 hours or more
You'd be dead by
before,
then.
well, quite possibly.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a parallel there with what's happening in the public system today. But a lot of the problem was the fact that there was no town water supply. People got their water from rainwater tanks
All right.
or water holes or from South Creek. And because it was a farming area, around the 1900s there was very bad drought. And of course the winds and all, and one of the doctors from Penrith commented that a lot of the problem was that the dust had manure spores in it, in the dust, and that landed on the roof. When it rained, the water ran into the water tanks. So unless people boiled their drinking water and all, they were just open to disease straight away. It was so, and with the farming, you don't know what wash-off there was into the creeks and the water holes that they were using for domestic water as well. So it was a very difficult time.
I think it's still wise to boil the water unless you got a filter. I think it's wise to boil the water before you drink it, even nowadays.
Well, we had that scare a few years back, didn't we, with the water supply. But I think that was the main problem. And it wasn't until the early 1900s that we finally got regular medical service here. And that was when there was a Dr. Higgins from Penrith, because of course Penrith had a doctor well before St Mary's did.
All right.
And Dr. Higgins from Penrith, he used to visit twice a week. He would come on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so you had to get sick on those days. He'd visit just for the afternoon. And around this time, another chemist came. Mr. Lawson had obviously moved on, and Mr. Pye opened for business. And he could also perform dentistry. And for a time, he and Dr. Higgins from Penrith shared the same premises on the site of where the band club is now.
All right.
So I think Mr. Pye probably thought having a doctor on site, he would then make quite a lot of money from the prescriptions, but the townspeople must have been fairly healthy at that time. There were about 2,000 people living here then, and but Mr. Pye didn't make his fortune. He didn't do very well at all, and he closed up shop and moved to Penrith. But in 1906, a Dr. Cram came from Melbourne and set up practice on the corner of Queen Street and Chapel Street. He only stayed for about 3 years, and then they were about a year without a doctor before a Dr. Chauncey arrived in 1910. Well, he set up his practice in a house halfway up Church Hill here on the highway. The house is still there, just near the police station, a big brick house. And that had been built by George Hope, who was a local businessman. George Hope lived opposite at the time, but he rented the house to Dr. Chauncey. And again, he only stayed for 2 years, so there must have been something about the town they didn't like, whether it was because they didn't make enough money.
That's right, yeah.
Because a lot of people couldn't afford to go to the doctors, so if they belonged to one of these friendly societies, the friendly society used to subsidise the doctor.
Right.
It's a bit like having medical insurance today, you know, if you need to go to hospital.
Today,
Yes. So after Dr. Chauncey, we had Dr. Bell, and he too only stayed for 2 years. But he practiced in the same residence that Dr. Chauncey had been in. So at the beginning of 1914, he advertised his practice for sale, and it was bought then by a young doctor named Dr. Edward Day. And when he first came here, George Hope asked him would he like to buy the house, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not staying." He wanted to have a practice closer into the city. But after a little while, like World War One broke out, and that changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and so Dr. Day decided he would stay. And he bought the house from George Hope, and he stayed there. In fact, he until his death in 1953. So someone who came for such a short time and stayed for over 40 years until his death, and he was the only doctor here for many, many years. And but by this time, a small private hospital had opened in Station Street, just in like a residence, you know, and then a maternity hospital opened over on the corner of Queen Street and Chapel Street. So a lot of people around my age were actually born there.
Or is it where the Bengali site is, or?
No, this side.
Oh, this is where the little shop is,
Yes.
corner shop.
Yes, it was just like a big old brick home, but it was
All right.
a maternity
We'll go for a
hospital.
break before someone gives birth to a child, and we'll carry on in a short moment.
Mean Auto Repairs are situated at 91 Glossop Street, St Mary. They specialise in pink slips, diesel servicing, lube services, clutch and brake repairs, electronic tune-up and all mechanical repairs. All your motor